What is going to happen? It's the question that we pose ourselves with, and if we're being honest with ourselves, we know what's going to happen. We know the way the world works, and that eventually, at some point, there's an ending. We know where all roads lead, inevitably. Even Jesus knew where his own personal road led. We know where we are leading in terms of the liturgical year, the liturgical calendar. As we march steadily and steadily closer to the cross of Christ and the redemption found in that resurrection morning, we have to make a pit stop. It's the hardest pit stop, really. There's a whole day devoted to it that oftentimes gets glossed over because, well, it's very much a bummer. Talking about Good Friday. See, I found that there's a problem with Good Friday and Easter in general. Not that it's a bad one, it's just something that we don't really want to think about. Everyone loves Resurrection Sunday. Everyone loves the story of the tomb being opened, Jesus being alive, Mary jokingly mistaking him for the gardener, all of that fun stuff. We know what resurrection means to us. New life, and we're promised new life in Christ. But see, here's the problem with resurrections. A death has to occur first. It's depressing. I know, it's kind of down, and it's this whole thing that permeates the entire season of Lent. The shadow of death has been around this entire season, whether or not we want to acknowledge it. When we started everything with Ash Wednesday, we acknowledged it. And then we do what we always do. We just kind of push it to the side, and we don't ever think about it. But that's where it's leading, the inevitability. And in fact, our whole reading from the Gospel of John this morning has this permeating theme of death. You see, this story takes place in chapter 12, and chapter 11 is a very important chapter. Chapter 11 of John's Gospel has the story of Lazarus. Now, Lazarus, as we may know, is the most famous living dead person. Jesus tarried about 3 days and waited to go and see his good friend Lazarus, and he died. And so when Jesus shows up, there's weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. There's mourners. Mary and Martha are upset. Everyone's just kind of upset. And Jesus says, it's going to be fine. Lo and behold, miracle of miracles. What is it that Jesus does but resurrect Lazarus? Even after a few days, when the body would have already started to decompose and the gases and things would have been around, all of that is reversed. And Lazarus is raised to new life. And it's not like any of the other raisings that have been done before. No, this was days after the fact. Now, I don't know a lot about science per se. I mean, I've read and I've seen Frankenstein, but that's fiction. And I think that after a few days, I don't really think you can get the heart going again. Not only that, but your body and your muscles start to tense up and rigor mortis and all that horrible, gross stuff. And yet Jesus comes and reverses all of that. And so here we are in the 12th chapter of John's Gospel, 6 days before the Passover. And the Passover, as we know, as we'll be celebrating soon, is the story of death. The final plague in Egypt, the passing over of the houses of Israel. The night where God moved mightily and Pharaoh said, just go and get out. And John goes out of his way to point that Lazarus is at this table. Now, oftentimes when we come across this passage, we look at Mary. And we should look at Mary because she does this beautiful, amazing thing, moved by the love that she has for Christ. Moved by the care and the compassion that she has, she does this beautiful thing and gets him ready for his burial. And it's then that we realize it just keeps smacking us in the face over and over and over again about what is going to happen. Or we could focus on Judas. I know we don't talk about Judas much. Exactly. We don't talk about Judas and what he did because it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. Because it's not just that he led to Christ's arrest, but he betrayed Christ, and that betrayal led to the death of Christ. We don't want to think about that. And so we have these two figures, Mary and Judas, who are both focusing on completely different things. And each of them focuses on something else because that's where their priorities lie. Judas is said to have been a thief in this. It's interesting that that note is here. Now, if we assume that that was maybe just something that was put in to show that he was dishonest, he was. There's no getting around that. If he was going to betray Christ for 30 pieces of silver, he's a very dishonest person. Let's assume, however, that his intentions are also pure, that he's not going to take all of the 300 denarii that would go into the purse, but that he actually is going to make sure that some of that money goes to the poor. Now, John's gospel does a lot of things. It has a lot of high Christology, which means it places Christ very high. It talks a lot about the divinity of Christ. It's different than the other three Gospels, what we call the Synoptic Gospels, because of this. It starts off not with the birth of Christ, but with creation in general. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus being there in the beginning of all things. And so, John doesn't have a lot of time talking about the poor. Because that's not his point. He realizes that the poor are a thing that exist. They would have been predominantly the people in the area. Almost everybody was poor at some point in this time, unless you worked the social hierarchy and were climbing as best you could and got as close to the Romans as you possibly could. There were an overabundance of the poor to deal with. And so the fact that John brings them up now is very interesting. And the way that he brings it up is to say Judas is concerned about them, but not really. Let's say that Judas does care some. I don't know how you could be around Jesus and not care about the people Jesus cares about. That's just crazy to me. And so he is focusing on earthly things, the immediate, what is going on right now in front of him. And here's the really crazy thing. On a very technical level, Judas is right. That perfume could have been spent differently. And it's something that I think churches kind of struggle with. We have this money. What are we supposed to do with it? Let's get new carpet. Well, the carpet's fine. Do we really need new carpet? Yeah, it just doesn't look very nice. Or let's do something else with it. I have found that when budgets get tight, the first thing to go is mission. And that's wild to me. And it's wild to me because that's what we're called to do. And so Judas is actually trying to be a somewhat good disciple here and saying, what about the poor? Now, I know that John is saying he didn't really care about the poor. I would like to think, and maybe this is just me being a hopeless optimist and trying to find the best of everybody, even a scoundrel like Judas. And he wasn't going to take all of it. I don't know. But I know that Mary had her eyes set on something else, something bigger, something that was coming next, because her love for Jesus was permeated by her knowledge of the existence of death. She had seen with her first-hand experience the resurrection power of Jesus Christ. I don't understand. If you see something like that, how can you not be drastically changed? I don't understand. Mary is completely right in what she does because she understands now that this world is completely different and functions drastically different than she ever thought imaginable. She washes his feet with this nard perfume, which must have been very expensive. And again, you have to think, not everybody has 300 denarii that they could throw around, a denarii being about a day's wage. So this is a year's worth of saving on oil that goes on feet for the purposes of burying a Jesus who's not quite dead yet. But she gets it. And she understands. She understands that something else is happening here. Maybe she knows, maybe she doesn't know that Jesus is about to head to the cross. 6 days out from the Passover, before Palm Sunday, the triumphant entry, before Maundy Thursday, before Good Friday. Maybe for some reason, somehow she knows. And Judas tries to call her out on it. Well, I'm high and mighty. What about the poor? And Jesus says you're focusing on the wrong thing. There's going to be time for that. You're always going to have the poor with you. I will not always be here. Well, what does that mean? That's like some cryptic stuff if I've ever heard it. What do you mean you're not going to be here, Jesus? And it's interesting that they don't record Peter's reaction because Peter is like the quintessential overreactor here. That's not even the point of this story. The point is that Jesus is saying something else is coming. Something different is happening. And Mary, she's in on the ground floor because she gets it and she saw it firsthand. And Judas, who knows what his issue is because he should have seen it too. But for some reason, he remained changed. I think it's the classic problem that we find from our passage in Isaiah this morning. The passage in Isaiah is written to a people in exile. Now, as I've said time and time again, the Jewish people at this time are a people bound by generational trauma. It has been heartache after heartache after heartache. Something, it seems, is always going on to these people. And it starts in Egypt when they are enslaved. And a bunch of horrible, basically war crimes are committed against the people. And then Passover happens after the plagues, after Moses comes along, and they leave. And that's where Isaiah picks up on this. Ko Amar Adonai, thus saith the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings out chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down and cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Do you not know what I have done, declares the Lord? When the people were fleeing Egypt, when they were fleeing slavery, what did they see in front of them but a sea? Now, I've been swimming in oceans. It's fun. It's great. It's wonderful. The undertow is not your friend at all. We see the undertow and we say, no, you don't. You have to always be careful. And that's one of the lessons I try to teach the kids, when we're swimming. Be careful of the undertow. You're going to slowly drift out and to the side, and you have to stay focused right here. And that's a modern problem. That's something that we deal with. Now, imagine that you're also carrying as much of your earthly possessions as you could on your back. But wait, there's more, because you have children with you. And of course, children aren't going to be able to swim across that. Oh, wait, but you also have the elderly with you, and they're not going to be able to swim across it. So what you have before you is a death sentence. It makes no sense to try to go through it, but that's the only way you can go. Why is it the only way you can go, you ask? Because as soon as you turn around, you see the most technologically advanced army at that time bearing down on you. Chariots, wheels, metal spears, swords, all of these things, snarling horses coming at you with the express intent to either kill or capture you. So it's the devil you know or the devil you don't know. And somehow you have to make a choice. And God says, but wait, it's going to be fine. The sea splits, they walk through, and in one mighty act, the greatest military presence at that time wiped out. And that's what God does. It's this great story, right? It's this hopeful story. Yeah, we kind of gloss over the, more PG-13 related aspects of the story. But Isaiah says, remember that. Do you remember that? Do you recall that that's a thing that happened objectively? That's truth. That's history, he says. You remember that. And then he goes and says, I'm about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? And he goes on to explain how this new thing is making a way in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, wild animals, jackals and ostriches. All of these big, scary critters are going to bow down and honor God. There will be water in the desert to drink. The people whom I formed for myself, so they might declare my praise, they're going to be saved. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and yet there is a line that permeates it. Because as wonderful as the Exodus was, we have to look at verse 18 just a little bit closer. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. Now, the Exodus was a big deal. It was a very big deal. It is still celebrated to this day. The Passover, the leaving of Egypt for the people, that is still celebrated to this day. And Isaiah is saying, forget about it. And you stop and think, you're like, how can we forget about it? Like, that's such an amazing thing that happened. Like, we were saved. God saved us. Why is it we would want to forget about that? And because God says, I am doing a new thing. It's subtle. But what it boils down to is God basically saying, you ain't seen nothing yet. Not the best is yet to come, that there's more. Now, to a people stuck in exile, desperately longing and wanting to go home, this would have given them hope. It should give us hope. Hope is what we have. Through all things, it is hope that we hold on to the most. It is the hope that everything will be fine that drives Mary to do what she does. It is the uncertainty of Judas that drives him to do what he does. He betrays Jesus for 30 silver coins. What were you going to do with that? Spend it on things I want/need. Obviously. It's the difference between kind of short-term gains and long-term gains. Because Mary understands that the best is yet to come, that there is something new going on in the world. In the midst of death, in the midst of destruction, of trials and tribulations, in the midst of all of that, behold, God is doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Mary did. Judas didn't. That's the difference. Now, I think it would go without saying that we should probably try to be a little more like Mary and a little bit less like Judas. And the reason is because we should live in that hope. We know what it is that God has done. We know that God has carried us personally, individually, throughout our lives and helped us to be where we need to be and helped us to be the people we needed to be. And we may not know what comes next. I have a fairly good idea as to what's going to happen when we're done here today. I have a fairly good idea about how my week is going to play out. But again, I live with 6 chaos gremlins who I love very dearly. And so a monkey wrench could be thrown in my plans at any time. Because something always could happen. The only thing I know for sure is that one day, eventually, I'm going to come face to face with God. This earthly form will rest, and I will be with a God who loves me. I don't know what that's going to look like. I know that there's a bunch of books and movies and TV shows about it. It's a very popular sort of type of popular culture phenomenon, people talking about, I've spent 30 minutes in heaven. Well, I've spent 25 minutes in hell. Because we always want to know what happens next, but none of us, with any amount of 100% certainty, can know for sure what things look like in the future. And the uncertainty is what scares us. And so we can do one of two things. We can live for the here and now like Judas. We can live focusing only on what we have right now. Or we can focus our attentions more like Mary, who focuses on both, actually. Because she has Jesus now, and that's why she does what she does. She's not going to have Jesus forever, but she has Jesus right now, and she's going to make sure she spends the best amount of time possible that she can, and that's the key. Human beings always want the one thing we can't quite have, and it's time. I woke up this morning, and I was getting ready and making myself nice and beautiful. And I looked in the mirror, and as I'm trying somewhat successfully to grow a beard, I'm noticing a lot more salt than pepper. Yeah. I'm noticing it in my hair. I'm noticing the crow's feet getting a little bit longer, and I know that I'm getting older. And it's not a bad thing. But we think about the things that we could have done. I could have done so much more if I only had more time. Don't worry about that. You have time now. Carpe the diem now. Don't wait. Don't sit back and say, I'm going to seize the day tomorrow when it's convenient for me. Because here's the thing. God is already there tomorrow. Just like God is here with you today. A God of love, a God of new life who guides us and carries us. Yes. You will always say you want more time. You want more time to do things. You don't know. But what you do know is that now, in this moment, you have the time and you have the God who makes all things new. So do it now. Don't wait and say, I'm going to do what God wants me to do later. Just do it now. You are the new thing in the world that God is doing. Yes, God is doing something else afterwards, but right now, here, in this moment, you are the new thing. Oh, I wish the world were better. I wish people were nicer. I wish people were doing this. I wish there was this program. Why, God? Why are you not doing this? Well, I'm doing something about it. I made you sit there and complain and think about it. So get up and do something with it. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Awesome. Good for you. Doesn't change the fact that right now you can change the world. Be that new thing. Don't be afraid of what's happening tomorrow. Live your life boldly for Christ here and now. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But what I do know is that God has a pretty good track record of doing mighty and powerful and wonderful things. And so if God says the best is yet to come, I happen to believe that the best is yet to come. To go along with that, let's start working on it now. Amen.